All right, everybody, it's Peter Cole, and I'm back. It's a new year, 2023. I hope I got that right. And we're starting with a new series, kicking off a new series. I'm still doing all the intro to orchestral sample libraries, intro to the percussion, all that kind of composition, production projects, of course. I'm still doing that. But we're switching gears just a little bit and focusing on concepts, best practices that I've learned anyway for writing music for TV and film. Now, let me start by saying I am by no means any hardcore professional at this. I do it. I do what's called sync licensing. I'm going to talk about what that means in case that's new to you. Sync licensing is something that I do kind of on the side, and I'm trying to build it up and do more and more of it. I've had placements in some really exciting TV shows, and not in any films yet, but lots of TV programs. And so I wanted to do a series where I'm talking about some of the things I've learned through that process. So some of the concepts, like the one we're focused on today, are more broad, high level, kind of more approaches to how we compose the music. And that applies to whether you're doing this sync licensing stuff, which again I'm going to talk about, or if you're doing more pretty much any kind of music, even if you're not involved with writing music for film at all. It's just good best practices for composing music. But some of the concepts in future videos, like the ones after this one, I am going to drill down to more specific things around that I've learned about sync licensing music and how I go about putting projects and compositions together specifically for TV and film in that sync licensing domain. So just real quick, what am I talking about? Sync licensing. So I'm not going to go into a tremendous amount of detail, but as a quick refresher, in case you're kind of familiar with it, or in case this is completely new to you, I kind of break up two different worlds of writing for TV and film. There's the scoring world, which probably is something you've heard of, right? Like film scoring. And that's when like a movie director comes to you as a composer and says, look, I've got my film here. Now I want you to write custom music for every single scene in that film. So you as a composer are looking at the film and you're writing music and it's matching in terms of the tempo, in terms of like where things hit. It's literally custom made for the film, the visual on the screen. Sync licensing, on the other hand, writing music for sync is a bit different because in this scenario, the music's already written. And then you sync it, that's where the term comes from, you sync it to the picture. So for example, pick like an old Michael Jackson song, like Beat It. Michael Jackson, rest in peace, wrote that a long time ago, right? In the 80s or something. I hope I got that right. And so the song's already written. If a movie producer wanted to use Beat It in his movie, well, he's not asking Michael to write something from scratch. Of course, he can't do that now, right? But he's syncing a previously existing piece of music to the picture. Why would you want to do that? Well, a couple of things. One, at the end of the day, and this is what we're talking about today, music is there to support the visual. And you can do it in a number of ways. You can write a custom score where you're literally writing a custom piece of music for that scene, or in some cases, they are just looking for an emotion, some sort of energy that exists in a previous existing piece of music. So over the years, this whole kind of industry of sync licensing has developed because it's a way of, in some ways, you don't have to go through and pay a film composer to write music from scratch every time. For one, you can pull from a library of pre-existing music and try to match it up as best you can to your visual. And that's where some of the tips and tricks and techniques that I'm going to be talking about in a future video is going to focus on. How do you go about creating music for sync, right? Where you're kind of working blind. You don't know what the end visual is going to be. You kind of have to start with an idea that should work in a number of settings and a number of visual scenes, and then down the road it might get used in a film or a TV program based on if it's supporting the visual or not. It all comes down to that. So again, I want to talk more about kind of more technical, almost like tips and tricks specifically to sync. And that's going to come up in the next video. But in this video, this is a more broader concept around what I consider to be the number one most important concept to get, whether you're doing sync music, whether you're doing custom film scoring, or frankly, if you're doing any kind of music, and that is to capture an emotion. So, what do I mean by emotion? Well, of course, I mean how you make a person feel, right? So, in the context of a visual medium, movie director shooting a scene, maybe it's a sad scene, maybe there's people who are dying in this scene. Are you going to want to go in there with a tuba playing mariachi music? Dun, 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 dun. I know that sounds kind of absurd, but you hopefully you can see my point. Is that the power of music is so powerful? It's part of the whole experience. Like, you change the music just a little bit, or you go in with the wrong emotion, and the whole scene falls apart. It's communicating things to the viewer that maybe can't be communicated through the visual, or maybe it just needs to be enhanced by the music. So that's why the emotion is so powerful. When a movie producer is going through and they're listening to different types of music, and they're trying to find the music that matches the scene based on what? Based on the emotion. It's not based on how cool it is or how new and innovative. None of that really matters, right? It's about, does it capture the emotion of the scene? Is it supporting it? Is it enhancing it? Hopefully, it's not doing the opposite, like the mariachi band tuba guy at the funeral, right? That would be the opposite effect, unless that's the vision the director's going for. But you get my point, right? You're trying to zero in on an emotion and nail that, and through the music. One of the things that I've noticed on a lot of other folks on YouTube and other forums, when they talk about writing music and producing and stuff, for some reason this concept is not talked about that much. And I think part of the reason is it's difficult. Like, how do you can teach someone how to use their tools, right? Their digital audio workstations, their samplers, their sample libraries. You can learn how to play piano. How do you go about learning emotion? Well, to me, the first place starts by studying. So you study film. If you want to work in film, or you want to work in TV, you study when you're watching these shows. Like, listen to the music and understand, like, what are they doing? How are they creating an emotion through their music? What tools? What are the things they're doing? Why are you feeling a certain way? Another thing that I suggest doing is start to categorize the different emotions. Then you kind of do the subcategories underneath there. Let me show you an example. This is extremely crude. And again, this is just me and how I think of it. But I did a little research online, and some website somewhere called out that there are 6 main human emotions. I didn't know that. And some other websites, by the way, listed a lot more, I think 17. So I'm just trying to keep it simple here. Let's just stay kind of focused. In my experience, these are the ones that we use the most. So happy, sad, I already talked about that. Fear, I talked about. Now, disgust is an interesting one. I have never been asked to write a piece of music that creates a disgusting emotion, but maybe that's just me. Maybe I will someday. Anger, definitely, right? Anger, we all know anger. Anger's everywhere in TV and movies. And of course, surprise, that's as well, right? And then I just started putting this little table together. This is incredibly crude, and by no means take this as any sort of like musical training or anything, but you can see what I'm getting at here. If we look at the top level emotions, a lot of these other ones, to me, kind of fall underneath there. And what we're doing as a composer is we're creating music that is kind of think of it as if you look at the top one here, being the most extreme, I guess that's the word I would use. These are on kind of a different, it's like almost like a gradient, right? It gets more and more extreme the more you go up. Again, this is just my way of visualizing it. So to me, something might start off as calm, peaceful. I'm not necessarily happy yet, right? I'm just calm, I'm peaceful. And as we ramp it up, we move up the scale until, we're full on happy. Again, very crude, I know, but it's just one way of trying to take all these different emotions and categorize them. And it helps me anyway when I'm composing because I want to make sure I know where on that spectrum my music is falling. Great example that I always struggle with is again under the fear one. When you start looking at these ones here, I called out earlier tension, by far the number one requested emotion without a doubt. Um, but there's different levels of it, right? You can start off being there's a little bit of confusion. Maybe the scene is about someone and they're just starting to understand that something is wrong, right? But they don't have all the details yet. And as we ramp that up, we start to get anxious. And then there's some anticipation, and then there's the tension. And then to me, and again, this is just me, suspense kind of falls out of that. Now it's full on, there's something happening here, right? And then you can take that up the scale, and pretty soon you're talking about full on horror or fear. So you're trying to, at least this is how I try to do. I try to kind of imagine things along this scale. I remember early on when I was first kind of trying to compose music for TV and film, and they would ask all the time for tension music, and I wasn't experienced enough yet, and I was giving them stuff that just wasn't tense. It was how what they described it. When I got the feedback from the publishers later, I got feedback saying, "Look, this is cool, but this is more like drama. We need something tense." And back then I was like, "What do you mean? Like, sounds tense to me?" Or I couldn't understand like quite the difference. And it seems obvious now, but what I was creating at that time was more dramatic music. It wasn't necessarily tense. So we want to. That's why kind of this table in my head starts to help me kind of lay out on a spectrum where these different emotions sit. So now, after all that practice, now it's much easier for me to understand the difference between when they say, I want something tense versus something, maybe it's dramatic. So that helped me, and I hope that kind of helps you. But then the next big question is, okay, well, now that we've kind of categorized it, what do we have in our arsenal as composers to create the right emotion? At a top, like a high level, I think, and I always tell this to people, music gives us kind of the two biggest tools just in the harmonic language, right? You have a major scale and you have a minor scale. And, not to make it sound overly simplistic, but really you have the major, which is our happy, positive sound, right? It's the happy sound, the positive. And you have minor, which sounds sadder. And there's technical reasons behind that, right? The way the different notes blend together create those sounds to us. And over the years, through our culture, we have associated positive major sounding scales with a positive, happy emotion. And, the opposite goes with minor. And then, of course, we have dissonant scales as well, like diminished tonalities. And to me, that is also a tool, right? If you're creating something diminished, well, now you're potentially getting into that maybe eerie, maybe it's horror, maybe it's tension, maybe it's science fiction, right? So you have that other layer that like where things get not major or minor, but diminished, right? Augmented scales, right? So now you have a couple of different high-level harmonic structures to work with. As a composer, if someone says, I want you to make something really happy, well, you're going to probably focus in the major scale, right? As a starting point. It's just the start, right? You don't want to say, okay, I'm going to write you a really happy song. It's going to be in, B diminished or something. Like probably that's not what the visuals are looking for. If they say they want something happy, they want something happy. So you start kind of at that harmonic level. Then we start looking at the instrumentation. And this is interesting because there's aspects of instruments that are just cultural, that over the years have been associated with different feelings. To me, for example, a tuba just always sounds funny. Maybe it's just me. I don't mean to, harsh on the tuba or the tuba players, but to me, it's a kind of a jolly, for the most part. Of course, you can make it sound sad, but it's a more happier sounding instrument to me. A lot of the brass is that way, frankly. Whereas stringed instruments, they tend to be commonly used for more like sad or more romantic, emotional type music. Viola and cello, just personally, are two of the saddest sounding instruments, and I mean that in a good way. To me, when I hear a viola play, it doesn't matter even if they're playing something happy. When I hear a viola, it's got a darker sound. It doesn't have the high end range that the violin has. It also doesn't go as low, of course, as the cello. So to me, the viola, it just always sounds sad. So if someone says make something sad, the first thing I think about is the viola. That's just me, but these are some of the things we start to piece together. The instrumentation, why a certain instrument can sound, a certain way, is part of our toolbox as composers for when we're trying to create the emotion. Another thing, especially nowadays, even more popular with music now, is just the overall kind of ambience and perhaps sound design that can be added to affect the emotion. For example, you think of a drone, right? Just a single toned sound, and that could be created, on a synthesizer using just like literally just one key do, or perhaps with a acoustic instrument as well. Of course, anything can create a drone, but that is something where there is no harmonic language, right? It's literally just one note. But that in and of itself, that simple thing creates an emotion. One lesson that you could try, you could start with a just a single drone sound, go into your synth and just play like a sine wave. And with that one sound, play with the dials in your synth until you start adding harmonic content into that drone, right? Certain things you add in are going to be major and they're going to support the scale. So they're going to start to create a drone that sounds maybe calm or peaceful or positive. Then, but you might be switching it around. You might hit some harmonic content that adds dissonant notes. Maybe it's a minor key, or maybe it's a full-on like diminished note that's out of the scale and clashes with the main root of the drone, right? And so you can see just by one simple note, you can start to introduce emotion just with one single note. And that's pretty powerful. And that's a good way, I also think, is to get to learn, train your ears to be able to hear how it sounds. So I do a lot of different music, right? And I what happens is maybe a publisher will say, we have a TV show coming up. Here's the show. These are the types of emotions they're looking for. They want stuff that's happy. They want stuff that's funny. They want stuff that's sad. They want stuff that's tense. And usually, hopefully, there's a little more, there's more of a brief to it than just that. There's more about in the instruments that they are interested in hearing, or maybe just the overall, vibe or genre. Maybe they only want hip hop, for example. Whatever it is, they will give you kind of that brief of what they're looking for. Then you go off and you spend time composing all these tracks. But again, you don't know what the visuals are. So you're kind of working blind, but you have what is your guide is the brief, which includes the emotional content that they're looking for. One thing I can't forget to mention, when you're composing your music and you're following and you're focusing on an emotion, stick to that single emotion, right? So if they ask for a sad song, don't make part of it sad and then start making it a little happy and then come back. That's getting to the realm of scoring, right? Where you're trying to score multiple emotions that could fit, through a scene that's evolving. But again, that's custom scoring. We're talking about sync licensing, where the music is created ahead of time and it's got to be in like these little kind of like self-contained emotion blocks almost, right? Like, ooh, I need something that's going to be sad. So they're going to pick your sad song. Oh, okay, now the scene changed, but I need something to be happy. So they'll pick a happy song. You don't want to create something that's confusing, that's sort of happy, and then it becomes sad. And no, just stick to a single emotion. So, but again, sometimes let's say you'll do an album and it's got 10 tracks on there, and you give it to your publisher, and the publisher says, okay, great, thank you. Now we're going to go and give it to the TV show, and we're going to see which ones they use. So you don't know if they're going to use any of them, or maybe they'll use all of them, or, what's most likely is they'll use a few of them, right? They'll use some of yours, maybe some from someone else. What I've noticed that gets used the most, and again, I'm thinking purely from an emotional standpoint here, We'll get into the other stuff in future videos. But it's the ones where the emotion is the most clear, where there's some tension going on. Maybe there's two characters and they're just not getting along, and they're almost about to fight, right? You can't mess around with that. You got to put tense music behind that. So you need something that's just inarguably, hopefully that's a word, tense. And similar, I think even more so with like horror and fear. If you want to inspire that emotion in your viewers, you can't mess around. You got to give them something that is truly terrifying. That's scary. Another big example, when you think about it, you see this all the time on TV commercials. Slightly different domain here, because it's similar, but not always quite the same. Because a lot of TV commercials do have custom scores in them. But in a TV commercial, let's say it's a brand and they want to inspire their potential new customers about being super positive and happy and ready to take on the world, right? Like are they going to pick a piece of music that's kind of like that? It's like, oh yeah, that's happy. It's in a major key. It's got energy. They're not gonna pick the kind of the sort of one. They're gonna pick the one that like hits you over the head with happiness. And so that's kind of the things I've learned, is that if you're just getting started with this and you're starting to practice like writing for a specific emotion, take it to the extreme at first. I'm serious. Like just go. You want to make something happy, make it so happy that you're almost gonna throw up. It's just. And then, of course, as you learn and you get better, you can dial it back and fine tune it. And then you learn that there's different levels of happiness, right? Same with tension and fear and sadness. Same thing, different levels of it. But as a starting point, I strongly recommend you push each one of those emotions to the extreme, because it's going to force you to practice. This early work you do might not ever get used. A lot of mine didn't get used, but it's going to be a great exercise in really understanding how to create an emotion and elicit that in a listener. I'll give you, as I leave here, I'll give you one example of something that happened just recently to kind of illustrate a lot of these concepts. I was asked to create a bunch of music for a TV show, and the music supervisor said, okay, here's what I want. And he listed out, again, the emotions. He said, happy. He actually said, I want some happy stuff, some comedic. So he actually wanted comedy. Tension, of course, everybody wants that. And more like tension and dramatic stuff. He might have said sad as well. It was all the standard ones that I just went over. And then he said, in terms of instrumentation, I only want organic acoustic instruments, specifically piano, maybe some strings. So piano strings, absolutely. I do not want any electronic instruments, nothing digital. So he obviously was creating a visual, a TV show that needed kind of this more natural, organic sounding instrumentation for the music. So then I went off, and the reality is, and with a lot of this stuff, this one in particular was an incredibly tight turnaround. So I did create a bunch of stuff on the fly that matched what he said. I had a couple of older pieces that I'd done maybe a few months ago, and they were piano based, but they also had a lot of other stuff, including electronics, including digital content. So the exact thing he said he didn't want. But to me, they fit the emotion, they fit the genre, they fit everything else he said. And so I just said, what the heck, I'm going to throw it into the pile here. And maybe it gets picked, maybe it doesn't. Maybe they'll yell at me and say, why'd you give me this? Anyway, long story short, those pieces there that went somewhat against what the music supervisor had said were the ones he picked and put at the top of the list and went straight to the show. So it just goes to show you never know if the emotion is right. And, obviously it had to be in the right genre and the right style with the right instrumentation. But even some of those other things in there that initially he thought he didn't want and weren't going to work, for whatever reason, these pieces, the emotion was so strong and the style was so clear for what he wanted that stuff kind of fell by the wayside. So sometimes, and that's another lesson here, sometimes what a director thinks they want or what you might think you want all these things can sometimes get a little complicated when we focus too much on the tools that we use to create it, right? So if we focus too much on, electronic versus organic versus acoustic versus, using a computer versus analog, all this stuff, like at the end of the day, like, does it fit the emotion or not? Like, that's really what matters. So there's my speech on emotion. Extremely important. We will continue to review this throughout the series here. The next stuff I'm going to be focused on, however, are the more kind of what I call tactical things specific to sync licensing. So in all these examples, I'm writing music. I'm kind of doing it blind, right? Like I just said. What are the things I do when I'm putting together a piece of music, knowing how it might ultimately be used? And these are more like structural things that we put in as we're composing, so that it's easier to use when the film director wants to place it into their TV or their film spot, right? These are way more tactical things, but I wanted to start with this, which again to me is the most important, which is the emotion. You got to get the emotion right. So please like and subscribe. You'll definitely want to come back and see the rest of this series. Again, this is really powerful stuff, whether you're interested in writing for TV and film or whether you just want to get stronger as a composer. I truly believe the things we're covering in this series is going to be extremely beneficial to you. And I hope you come back. So I will see you next time.